This war is real. Fighting is everything. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Tempt not the righteous man to draw his sword. Conviction, righteousness, ruthlessness. To understand tolerance, you have to understand the line of intolerance. War is the teacher, soldiers are the students. They become the bards of war. Over this past year, we've been blessed to have many significant influencer voices join this channel for interviews, from General Flynn to Archbishop Vigano to Jim Pugh. And now we have the pleasure of having Jaun join us for an amazing discussion on the origins and the challenges that we face as we disassemble and confront one of the greatest evils known to man, which we call the Cabal. So please join me for part 1 of Jaun Unplugged.
I enjoy talking to all my heroes, the folks that are doing what you're doing, where they're actually kind of going door to door, street to street to take the country back. You guys are doing the heavy lifting, and I'm not saying that lightly. That's exactly how I feel. So,
oh, thank you very much. It's interesting. I don't know. I kind of told you in the email. Robert Steele and I worked for some of the same people, just so you know. That's how we first talked when he first came on the scene, which is when he first left his former job, and that was back in 2016 or so. We had a chat then, and it's kind of funny. And I say that because there's some voices that have been out here, a while, as we've tried to kind of wake people up a little bit, because it's this is quite the cabal we're fighting, I guess I should say, right?
Oh, sheesh, to the moon. Well, I mean, if you've been around, you're too, I'll take it for granted. You're too young to remember all the fights back to the early 70s and 60s even. Stuff that I was around as a kid. And the guys, the way they would talk, what they would say about what was going on, stunning. And it's very fresh for me because a lot of those conversations are still ringing in my ears all these decades later. It seems new today, I think, for people just as they're waking up. But for me, even with my, reading and study and the crowd that I ran with, this is, has been around all along. It's just that it's finally come to a head where we can't sustain any longer. You cannot put up with it any longer. And so the time has come to kick them all in the ass and change the mode here.
That's well said. Jaun, can you talk a little bit about, your knowledge about DC and its connection to Osiris and all of that picture that you paint, which you've done a great job in a number of interviews. And I just think that is such a critical foundation point to understand how this relates to everything.
Well, if you think about our whole country, at this moment in time, the whole Operation America is centered around Washington, D.C. And I'll get to the monument in just a moment, but I want to think in a little bit bigger sense. Consider that when the Constitution was signed by the leaders of the various states, and they each had a slightly different perspective on what community, some type of corporate collection of citizens and voters and residents meant, and then their local commerce, their communities were built around slightly different ideals. One area being into textiles and the other one into growing tobacco or something, and another one because the commerce trade was done by boats, more marine oriented or something like that. So different states had different focuses. And then they had to come together in this kind of a regional mentality, a collection of states, in order to work together. You know, the local state work is done to protect the community more than else. You know, a policing action from those that would steal from you at the local level, somebody that might try to take business advantage of you and somehow damage you, you know, in your home or your business, steal from you, leverage attacks on you that you then have to pay something, or community resources are applied to building a street on the other guy's property, not yours. And so you got to, you know, get some commissioner to agree that if you're going to spend community money on street, it should be here, not there, and serve everybody's interest, not just somebody that's able to pull somebody to their side somehow. So, you know, within a state or community type of a relationship of citizens, the focus is more internal. As you get you know, to a nation state type of mentality, the problem is you have to worry about pirates, those that would sail in, try to steal something from you and sail off. You have to worry about, you know, a military threat, a marauder threat. So because, you know, other nations could literally have a threat, or even business groups of pirates, if you will, could target you because you're weak. In order to provide a strong defense, you have a policing function internally, and you have a military function where you come together as a group of states, all for one for all. Anybody attacks any state here or there, someplace else, then you all come together to go against that attacker. And so now you're bigger as a community. And so this federalization of states entering into pacts to protect each other, so that anybody that, you know, would think that well, we're just going to get those little guys up there at Delaware or something, because they're small, they haven't got any resources, and they'll be easy to steal from. You touch them and all the states come after you. That's, you know, this federalization of government. Well, as the country has grown, what happened was this administrative function with a central government, a federal government, has grown and grown. And where it really went over the top in modern history is prior to the turn of the century, and at some level going back even to the Civil War, we had a need to, you know, pay for various expenses for this operation of a government, a coalition, if you will, of the states, a federal function of the individual states working together. And so early on, we had tariffs, and if there was trade coming in from outside the country, we imposed tariffs on those goods, and that would be the money to run the federal government. And you'd have some money contributed by the states, but it was a pretty small operation. Most functions of government were really done at the state level. You put in a road because the people in your state want to pay for a road. And there was virtually no money coming from the federal government to put in a local road. Very minimal federal presence, stamp, imprint into each of the states. And so they were a co-op, if you will. But the states brought their resources to the federal operation. So you literally had state-run guards or militias. And so if you wanted to have a war, for example, well, each state had to bring, with the governor's approval, their troops to the battle, if you will. And there was, you know, virtually nothing there of a federal army, if you will. The Marines were, the exception there. And so over time, what happened was there was this creation of a federal tax structure, and where the citizens would have to pay money into a federal tax situation, and that tax money suddenly made this minuscule, very slight co-op operation into some kind of a monster, a beast. I had a friend years ago, we kid about it at the time. He had a pet alligator that he got at, I think at Disneyland, I don't remember, I think it was even prior to Disney actually starting in Florida, but it was some kind of a park or something. And so he came home with this little alligator in a box, and his brothers both had one. Theirs died, his lived. So he kept feeding it, and it kept growing. And when it got to about 3 feet, it was still cute, but it was getting more of a nuisance. And then it got 5 and 6 feet, and he had to go off to college. And one day he gets a call from his mom at college, and she's demanding he return home immediately.
I can see where this is going.
And what's the problem? And the alligator has broken down the screen door at the back door where she's throwing food into the backyard for the alligator. He apparently got a little hungrier than normal or something. And so she can't use her patio. She can't use the backyard. She's finally had it. You come take care of your alligator. He had to return home and had to give it to some alligator park or something. What's the problem with alligators? They're green and they eat money. What's the problem with the federal government? It's green and it eats money. It's green with envy for all your money. So we've been feeding all this tax money, every kind of tax you can imagine. 30 years ago, one of the guys wrote a book, and he had looked at all the various federal taxing entities, and he came up with a number of like 90,000. I mean, this is incomprehensible to people. 90,000 different entities that had legal taxing authority out across the country. And, people are, wow, where do you find 90,000? That's just a ridiculous figure. Well, wait a minute. Have you looked at your phone bill lately? You're still paying taxes, federal taxes, for rural electrification. We've had rural electrification for 120 years. You're still paying a federal tax on it to run power lines somewhere for some federal project. You think those hammers that they put on these to build these jet fighters, and they charge $3,000 for a hammer. Well, who's even using a hammer on a jet fighter? But anyway, they got so many scams going. Water districts, Tennessee Valley this authority, and the Columbia Dam stuff. FET taxes, federal transportation taxes on the rubber on your tires in your car. It just goes on and on and on. Taxes on every kind of chemical for, save the planet this and save the planet that. You start adding it all up, and it just becomes spaghetti of obligations, and nobody even knows where all the money is coming from and going into. And that, as Ross Perot said, that sucking sound is the federal government drawing all of the resources out of the whole country. And so the economy of America has become incredibly highly centralized, so that there isn't any action that you can do anywhere disparately across the country. You can't put a sidewalk in Arizona without having to get, federal permits and matching money to make sure that there's not a salmon spawning stream, where you're putting in your sidewalk. It gets insane at some certain point. And that's what's going on. And so the control of the schools, every administrator in every school in every district across the country, well, they have to be careful that all of their guidelines, the way that they deal with their students, meets federal guidelines, because they'll get 10% more money or 15% more money by, complying with everything. So all of a sudden the school boards and everybody else is bowing to federal management. And so no function at the community level, at the city level, dog catcher level can be done without federal agreement and matching money. Yes, we chip every puppy that we send out with any new home, and they're also vaccinated and sprayed and, powdered and whatever before they kick their ass out to the new owners. And because we get federal matching money for puppy, distribution from our pound. And it sounds silly when I say it that way, but it's not. It's the facts. The federal government is leveraging and managing every single transaction that you do everywhere you go. And there's a little piece of money coming out of everything, and they're sucking out, it's 1% here and 0.5% there and 0.1% there. And next thing you know, it's real money. Because I remember I was buying a vehicle for one of my businesses. And it, I had one that was really good, but I had a business partner on there. He was buying something, and I thought, well, I don't want to run mine in the ground, even though I liked it. But I figured, well, might as well update now as long as I'm at it. And there was cash in the bank. And so I went down to order what I wanted. And I happened to call the accountant and says, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and pick up another rig. It's $100,000. And I just wanted to let you know. So we had cash in the bank. I was going to pay for it. And he says, well, actually, just a minute. And he does some clicking and pounding and all that. And he says, well, actually, we need to put another $10,000 in because you only got 150 in the bank right this second. And I says, well, okay, why is that? I'm only spending $100,000. He says, well, no, but you got to have money in there for the taxes you're going to have to pay. It's going to be about 160 that you need so you can buy the $100,000 vehicle. I'm like, what? Let me think about this for a second. I'm pretty good on this stuff, but I started adding it all up. And he's like, yeah, well, that's what you got to have. Because by the time you pay all of the taxes you're going to owe on that purchase and the sales tax and everything else, and then also in order to have $100,000 left over after you pay your federal taxes and your withholding taxes, your Social Security and everything else, we need to have about 160 in the bank. And then we're going to pay our taxes out of that. We're going to pay the state taxes on the sales tax and all that. And then you'll have your $100,000 left for the vehicle. I'm like, I thought about it for a minute. I was just sitting there ready to write the check. And I thought about it for a minute or two. And I said, you know what? Screw that. And I had the vehicle I'd been using. And it occurred to me, I said, I'm just going to take and put new engine in that sucker. It doesn't exactly need it, but I fix things before there's a problem because I could not have something fail at a critical moment. And I had about a month when I was going to be out of the country. And so I said, you know what? I'm just taking it over. I'm going to put a NASCAR quality motor in that sucker. I had a builder that was building engines for one of a car that I was racing. In a NASCAR circuit. So I took it over to my engine builder. I says, pull that engine tranny out, rebuild it, build it to these particular specs. And I told them all the things I wanted. And so they put about a $25,000 engine transmission in this rig. And then I had it, while they were doing that, I had it sent over, had it repainted a way that I wanted it. And some upgrades that I wanted in the interiors and like that. And so I ended up spending about $35,000 on this rig to have it rebuilt. And I said, we rebuild the aircraft. They go through a C-check and we just rebuild them and then go out and they go through another life cycle. I'm just going to do that with this because there's nothing wrong with the vehicle. I love the vehicle. And I actually, even looking at it, I thought the vehicle that was 3 years older was better in the way it was laid out than the newest model. So I said, no, I'm just going to keep this one. And so I spent 35 grand. And on top of that, by the way, because it was a business expense, it was a maintenance expense, it was a repair expense. Now I had something to offset income, and it was cheaper for me to just rebuild what I had because of the way the federal government had the tax stuff laid out than it was for me to buy new. Now, that really ticks me off at another level because an important business decision was made based on somebody else out in Congress and the tax policy people and all that, all their minutia forced me to make a particular type of business decision that at the end of the day, it favored the engine builder and interior and paint guys because they got some work out of it, but it didn't favor renewing and upgrading and keeping new with equipment. It really penalized commerce. So then you look at what happens later in the year, that same year. This was a year where there was some economic crises going on in the country. So the federal government turns around and says, well, if you get rid of your clunker, and if you buy new, we'll give you this big one-time tax savings thing. And I think, as I recall, it was like an accelerated depreciation rate or something. And so my accountant calls up and says, if you wanted to still buy one of those rigs, you could do it now, and it actually will make sense. And I says, I already redid what I got. I'm happy with what I got. But I did end up doing that for a couple of employee vehicles. And so the whole point is you had Washington, D.C. controlling policies in the way that they administered the tax to try and cause everybody out across the country to spend, don't spend, spend, don't spend, step on the gas, don't step on the gas. And who was it favoring in this particular situation? Well, it was bankers, because the bankers and I think GMAC was, about to go bankrupt or something. And, so they came up with a policy that favored them, which is one of the, money side of GM and some of the other people and other companies that were run well. By the way, Ford, I'm a Ford guy. They didn't take the federal money because they hadn't done all the mischief to put themselves into a crisis that some of the other automakers did. And so the federal government decided that they did things to favor lousy business practices over at GM by bailing them out by a tax favorable tax thing and clunker thing that essentially bailed out GM. So a lousy operation as a car building and sales operation was promoted and assisted, and a great well-run operation like Ford had been doing at that time, they got their competitor helped against them. Their good business practices were penalized, and the lousy business practices were favored. Same thing happened, Chrysler, had to go through a bailout. Now they paid it all back, and I give them credit for that back in the 80s. But when Lee Iacocca came in and just took shares instead of income, and bet his time that he could bring the company back, and did great stuff, brought the Caravan out and all that, and did great stuff. But at the end of the day, you have the federal government deciding who's going to win and who's going to lose amongst these various players. Now, all of that conversation, what I'm trying to say here is that you have this federal machine, this highly centralized operation running every facet of the operations around the country at very far away places. There's a saying, I believe it was Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, I take it back, I think it said it. If the federal government, if the feds are essentially telling you when to plant and when to reap, you will soon be wanting for food. If you have one person telling everybody, okay, everybody plant right now, and then later they telling everybody reap right now, it's very inefficient. And the reason is because out across a country like ours, when you should plant and when you should harvest in Iowa is different than it is in northern Montana, is different than it is in eastern Washington or in southern California. Their climates, their altitudes, their wind and water rain patterns are totally different. So there's no one way that suits all of them. That's why even the operation of the states, the way a state spends money in South Carolina makes a different kind of sense than the way a state spends money in Delaware or in California to support its citizens. And when you have one little tiny speck on the map where all those decisions are made by just a handful of people, it doesn't necessarily favor good, efficient operations. For example, even in my corporations, what if I want to do R&D and develop new products and not have to think about, gee, is it time I got to buy new vehicles because otherwise I'm not going to get the tax advantage if I don't get it in before the end of the month? Maybe I need to spend the money on R&D and they're not favoring R&D today, or I need to spend the money on more employees or less. But the Fed's favoring one direction or the other. You got these people that are stepping on the gas and hitting the brakes, 1,000 miles, 5,000 miles away, and it doesn't, and they're micromanaging how I run my business, how I operate, how I think. And why? Because they're thinking of their big operation, their big federal operation. Well, that's centralized government. And so America has gone from local control, local management and jurisdictions in the municipalities, the cities, in the counties, in the state, of every aspect of life. Instead of the sheriff of the county who's elected by the citizens enforcing the law there in his county, they'd like to have everything monitored and supervised and controlled at some federal level. They've gone out of control. It's lost this local citizen authority, with the feds overriding every action. I remember I was out in Oregon during the era when they had the problems that led to the death of little boy Finicum, murder, really, my opinion. And I was with the sheriff of the county there, and they had a bunch of feds that came in and just decided to park in a park and start doing something. And he says, I got to leave and go find out what's going on here, because they're not going to do this stuff in my county. And they are just running roughshod, and they need to notify me and let me know what's going on and what their plans are. And they're just coming in here like they run my county, and they don't run my county. I was elected to run my county. And that was a great guy. In fact, that's part of the thing with the sheriffs, Sheriff Mack, constitutional sheriffs group. They're having to remind the feds who has authority for policing in these various counties, including tax law. You got the IRS comes in, wants to just do anything they want in a lot of places, and in a lot of these counties, the local sheriffs have to remind them, you do things based on a certain way of enforcing whatever things you want to enforce. And some of the stuff they enforce isn't law; it's administrative law. It's not constitutional law. So all of that still coming back now. You're seeing this federal situation where they're leveraging all that money is being pulled out of the country and brought to this central pot in the middle of the country. And when they do that, that money is power. So as they draw it out of the rest of the country and they bring it into Washington, now you got a handful of elected officials who are deciding where to send it and how to send it, et cetera. And they're telling the federal agencies, here, you get this much money, you get that much money, you can do this thing and there. And they become very powerful. That alligator just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Once it reaches a certain point, now it wants to kick down the screen door and come into the pantry and take anything it wants, any time it wants, because it's so big that even the door, the Constitution, the local rules won't stop that thing from getting into the kitchen. And what's happening in America right now is your mom is calling, hey, get that alligator and get it out of here. That's the federal government. Come home, get the alligator, and get it out of here. Do whatever you got to do. I don't care what you got to do. I don't want to see what you got to do if you got to do it. I want that alligator out of here. I want my house back. I want my yard back. I want my pantry back. I want the sunroom back. I don't want that thing in this yard anymore. I don't want it terrorizing the neighbor kids if it gets loose through the fence. Get it out of here. That's the federal government. That's what's happening to America right now. They're completely out of control. Completely out of control. Do you understand? Completely out of control. Executive order this, executive order that, executive order another thing, executive order over and over. Everything's an executive order. It's an emergency. It's an emergency. Yes, everything is an emergency. Gotta hold the country under our grip. Okay? That's the federal government right now. And now I come back to your original question. That fucking monument in the middle of the city. At the center of the city that is running your country right now is this huge spire, this monument in stone. The entire city of Washington, D.C. is built around that spire. Every function of our federal government is built around that spire. And that sucking sound you hear is all of those people that bow and worship and honor and think it's just so great, that spire. Now, you put a good name on it. The Washington Monument. Our president, it's a wonderful thing. Oh. And everybody bows. Oh, it means so many wonderful things. It's so beautiful to look at. It's tall, it's magnificent. Everywhere in the city you can see it. You can see it as you're driving in from any angle, and the whole city the skyline is dominated by it. Well, what is the meaning of that thing that's the center of everything in this city? You know, when the presidents are sworn in, they're facing the monument. They have their Bible in front of them and they're putting their hand on it and their face is to the monument. When Obama had to do the second swearing in because they thought they might have made a mistake on the first one, they go into a room in the White House and he's sworn in and you see the pictures of him and there's a picture behind him. It's the architect of Washington, D.C., who's in this picture behind the president while he's got his hand on the Bible or, whatever books that were really there, etc. And he's being sworn in and saying his oath. Well, if you look at where his eyes are and you look overhead at what the layout is there in the White House, and there's a window right in front of him. And what's outside the window? The Washington fucking Monument. Again, give me a fucking break. And by the way, I said that specific word for a very specific reason, and I will come back to that in a few minutes. Because Washington, D.C. is built around that. What's the meaning? Why? Every city, every street in the city, every angle of every street in the city, the holy city of Washington, D.C., that every citizen in this country is having to pay homage to bow to curtsy to kneel to. For what purpose, by the way? Why? Because we all pay homage to this city. We pay alms to this city to keep it in control of us. The Constitution was a decentralizing document. It allowed no function of government to take place at any higher level than was necessary to accomplish its purposes. So when you look at what's happening in America right now and you compare it with the constitutional contract between the citizens and the government. Remember, the Constitution is your contract. A lot of people, they go to work for a company, or you buy a car or a house or something like that, and you make a contract. Okay, we agree to make these payments at this time, and you agree that we get title at the end when we finish making the payments. It's a contract between two parties. You buy a piece of property, whatever, a work agreement. The union works out a contract, so the employees get this much an hour for this thing, and they get their holiday pay, and they get, matching money for their health care, etc. It's a contract. It's an agreement between parties. Okay, well, the Constitution is a contract between the American population, the citizens in the various states, and the federal government. So when you look at that contract, if one party doesn't fulfill its obligations under the contract, the other party can sue. The other party can, protest in the court, or in many cases, a contract is considered null and void if either party violates the agreements within the contract. And so here in America, the Constitution is that agreement about how the citizens convey various authorities to the federal government. The states convey authority to a federal co-op government, if you will, and how it's going to work. When the federal government doesn't abide by the agreement, the Constitution, there's a problem. Now, what the Constitution in part protects is decentralization of power. So, for example, if you have, you got to put a sidewalk in, or you want to build a house, and you have a building agreements because you're in an earthquake zone or a flood zone or something like that, and you don't want to cause problems for other people or danger somehow, or the next guy that buys it doesn't know, the risk you are because of where you are in a floodplain or something. You have codes and community standards and obligations like that, and it's done at kind of a local level. And that makes sense because people locally kind of know what's going on, and then they see the guy that's administering that area of government on the street, in the store, around the community, and it's somebody that everybody knows and has contact with. And if you're going to try and corrupt something, Al Capone style, even Al Capone was limited to Chicago and the regions around it for the most part. All the other crime families were, New York or Florida or Louisiana, Texas, even the Dixie Mafia, still a small region. Why? Because as you get further and further out, it gets harder and harder and more unwieldy to corrupt officials, government people, police, etc. It gets unwieldy. And so they have their own little fiefdom. And if the people realize what's going on, they can come against it at the local level and push back on it and try to stop it. And so policing functions are done at more of a local level, generally, and more appropriately at a local level. And if things really get out of hand, people can pick up and move and go somewhere else where the corruption isn't so bad, because they're not going to live under that. The federal government is this thing where all of a sudden everything becomes the same everywhere you go. And you have all of your officials that run it are way over in Washington, D.C. They're not home at the local level. If you have corruption in Chicago, you can, decide as a community to come against it and try to vote it out. And it's harder to hide the corruption. Everybody's aware of it. People move away to a different community because they just can't live under that local corruption that way. The Constitution is this decentralizing document that keeps power in the states, in the local communities, and doesn't hand it over to somebody else huge, except to protect us from huge external threats, people that would come and dismantle us from outside, other countries, nation-state level threats, where the co-op of states come together, band together, and bring their armies together for some mutual defense pact, if you will, not to be managed internally in some huge, humongous way, like the alligator running roughshod over the whole house, but to protect from foreign parties coming in to take us over from the outside, steal and maraud and rape and pillage and everything else. The federal government's focus, external to the states and to America, has been shifted, and now it's all internal. It's all about managing all the states. The states have lost their rights. And the corruption, where corruption occurs, if you were going to try and corrupt America out across all the states, you might have to pay off 50, 100,000 people, local legislatures and senators and city officials and vote counting people and everything like that. And it becomes quite burdensome. But when everybody's in D.C., it's a highly leveraged, localized position, just like a teeter-totter. There's a fulcrum that it twists back and forth over that pivot point. And so the whole world is pivoting back and forth over that pivot point of Washington, D.C. And that's what's carrying all the balances. Well, a little move here, a little move there, and it changes the dynamic radically. It changes the pivot point for the whole country. And if you want to affect it, instead of having to pay off, bribe, control, manipulate tens of thousands of people out at the local level, now all you got to do is control 535 congressmen, 100 senators, a few judges here and there. And now you got it. You can do anything you want. So maybe you gotta, you don't have to do all of them. You just got to do a certain percentage of them that lean something a certain way. So, for example, in this election thing, the whole country didn't vote Biden, and they didn't have to throw the vote on the whole country. You only had a half dozen states, 4 states really, where the vote was corrupted adequately, that the whole country has to live with the consequences of their vote, of their corruption. It's like Chicago now runs the whole country with its corruption, as opposed to having to go out and corrupt every place. You just got to get a couple of them at pivot positions, and you can change the direction of the whole country. It's the tail wagging the dog. So when you look at what's happened with our federal government, this highly centralized system sucks all the energy out of the country, right down to this little speck postage stamp in 1,000 acres of land called Washington, D.C. And a few officials can change the direction of the country, change tax law, change policing law, change the relationship between our country and other countries, cause businesses to be exported and people to be imported, allowed through the border, whatever. And what the state wants, if Texas doesn't want people flowing over the border like an endless parade, or Arizona or California, the federal government tells you, no, you got to let those people through. You got to, do this way and do this that way. And the state doesn't have any control. The local citizens don't have any control. That's different than what it used to be. That's a centralized power, and the ability for the bad guys to only have to corrupt a handful of officials, a relatively small number of officials, in order to pull off a big ripoff, a big theft against the American people. A couple mobsters in Chicago running the whole city their way. Only this time it's the whole country. The Constitution is a decentralizing document. It keeps power out at the state and citizen and municipal and county level. It doesn't give the federal government huge, power over every aspect of your life, except for one thing. When you come to tax law and you suck the life out of the country, you suck all the excess and some out of the country. You feed that alligator, it gets bigger and stronger and tougher and more voracious every second. And now the federal government's running roughshod over everything, deciding what vote machines get favored because they get a federal tax break for using this style of vote machine. That, by the way, is crooked because a couple guys got paid off one way or another to make sure that there was federal matching money and grant money and other stuff to pick a certain type of vote machine so that certain people behind the scenes can manipulate the vote machines and then lock in the vote forever anywhere in the country that you're at far distant places. And they get control and they keep control. And as long as they're sucking the life out, you can make any law you want about sidewalks in Arizona, but without the federal government giving you the rest of the money you need to finish it, you'll never finish a sidewalk because you don't have enough money left over after all the taxes, all the federal stuff. And so you're pleading, please, please, please give us back some of our money that we sent you so we can use it to, have some jobs here locally. And then, by the way, why are they so pissed off at President Trump? Because, he slowed down this whole defense thing and called bullshit on some defense projects that were just insane, that favored, a little band of local people at certain places that were getting, jobs locally. The whole country has to pay for jobs locally for one operation that builds military widgets that don't do what they're supposed to do. They don't protect the people. They don't keep us safe. They just cost a pile of money. But there's jobs in that senator's district. There's jobs in that congressman's district. And he brought home the bacon at the expense of the whole rest of the country. Brought home the bacon at the expense of every other taxpayer. What's fair about that? We're being forced because somebody's little, and I'll say it just exactly this way. Somebody's butt fucking buddy is getting jobs for their little local thing, and then they become more powerful. And so that favors them. It's not in the best interest of the American people. It's just in the best interest of that little clique who has enough payoff money and enough leverage with their congressional party to pull these jobs in and do a contract on some military thing that isn't really about defense. It's about a payoff. And it happens over and 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 over till at some point it no longer even remotely makes any sense anymore. And then you look at Washington, D.C. Why? How has this happened? Who's behind this? How did it occur? How did it develop? Well, it's a club. It's a secret handshake club. It's a bunch of buddies working together, frat boys, college boys, all that go to the same fraternities, go to the same schools, the same bloodlines. Yeah, my dad, my grandpa, my great-grandpa, we all went to the same college. We got this heritage. Yeah, and you got your little Skull and Bones and 50 other organizations, the Orangemen, Scroll and Key, over and over. The list just goes, it's like 100 different little private clubs and fraternities, and they all work together, and we're helping you and you help us. It's a secret handshake between all of these people. And what do? They self-promote. They mutually self-promote. You promote our guy here, and he'll take care of getting you that money there. We'll promote your guy over here, and you'll get your money there. And what's happening? Behind the scenes, America's being administered by a cult, a club. And it's not just one, it's multiple of them working together collusively, not in the best interests of the farmer in Nebraska, but in the best interests of people that have alliances in their families against the interests of America, that have global aspirations, global interests. They don't want the factory here in America because they don't control how the money gets spent here. They can control you and how much money you got to spend for it, but you got to pay to move your factory from here to Japan, China, South America, because you can't make things green enough here. And oh, by the way, over there, they can't either. And they're way worse, but they're a growing economy. They're, a third world country, and we have to make an exception for them. So your Congress votes a law that you got to pay. They get a tax break again for moving your company, your job, your production to some other country to help the world. At whose expense? Yours? Yeah. Your family's? Yeah. That's what's been happening over and over and over again. Who's making those decisions? The little clubs all around Washington. And every street angle in Washington, every building at its base, at its corner, is marked, branded, tattooed with their marks, their ideas, their way of doing things. You think that it's just Washington. It's the home of the seat of democracy and capitalism and the American people's, holy city. Yeah, holy full of shit. That monument is actually got very ancient roots. The monument, the Washington Monument, that spire, that monolith, has religious symbology. All of Washington, D.C. is built around religious symbology that goes back to the Greeks and the Romans, into Egypt, and to Babylon itself. The story of the Washington Monument is about the story of Osiris. Who is Osiris? What's the god Osiris? What's that all about? Osiris was this god that was portrayed as being the most wicked of all the gods. And his brother Set was the sweetest, nicest, most benevolent god of all the gods. Both of them were born twins to Isis. And Isis, this female god, had sex with Zeus, who played around a lot, and Zeus, screws around with Isis. She gets pregnant and has twins. Okay, and one's a good twin and one's a bad, evil twin, kind of like a Cain-Abel type story. At some point, Set, the good god, decides that the evil, the horrors, the corruption of Osiris are so great that he must kill his brother. Now, one thing I'll tell you is that they're into the flip. They're into the reversal of roles. They're into twisting the way things look like. So you have a biblical narrative, Abel good, Cain bad. Here, now you're saying that, and Cain kills his brother Abel. Here you're having the good brother Set, and they want to flip the whole roles because it's demons that are really doing this. And so the good brother Set kills the evil brother Osiris. And when Set killed Osiris, he chopped his body into 14 pieces. And then Set scattered the pieces all around the earth because he's a god. He can run all over the place pretty quickly. A little later in the day, on the same day, and this was on the 17th of the first month of the year. A little later in the day, on this 17th date, Isis, the mother of the twins, finds out that Set has killed Osiris, and she's all upset and horrified and distraught over this. So she quickly races out across the earth, and she finds, being a god, she finds 13 of the 14 pieces of her son that have been chopped up, and brings them all to one place and assembles them. And the 14th part of his body she can't find, and it's been eaten by a fish is one of the legends. Of course, they always have, there's 15 variations on the legend, but essentially the 14th piece has been eaten by a fish. And there's all sorts of mythology. It goes to the Dogon tribes and the aliens from outer space and stuff, and I could go into it in depth, but it'd take hours, so it's not worth it. So what happens is that she assembles all the pieces she could find, and then because she can't find his penis, because it's been eaten by a fish, she fashions a penis for her dead son's corpse out of stone. And she fastens it to his body. So she literally makes a stone dildo and attaches it to his body. Then she decides to have sex with her dead son's corpse. Now think about, this is a religion, okay? This is an occult religion. Occult means hidden. Okay, so hidden right in plain sight, where everybody can see it, is hidden meaning, occult meaning to everything they do. So Isis, the mother, has sex with her dead son's corpse and this stone dildo, and then supposedly gets pregnant by her son through the dildo in this dead corpse. Now this is how twisted their religion is. Think of what the symbology, the imagery of what I'm saying. And this is the mother and the son. So then she becomes pregnant and she has a child, and the child is Horus. And Horus is the sun god. And Horus brings light and life to the world. Horus is like literally the sun in the sky that you see over you, every day in their religion. And as a monument in stone, as a memorabilia, a symbol of their religion, their occult beliefs, their occult practices, they believe that the sun god, Horus, the sun in the sky, is here to keep the earth warm and take care of us because of this act of Osiris interacting with his mother through his dead corpse and impregnating her and causing the sun god to come into existence. Amongst these groups within their little club, they're actually not kidding, and they're not upset with laughing about being a mother fucker. They're laughing right in your face about that. The city that is the center of your whole nation of America is built around a monument that is honoring symbolically this motherfucking act. And even the way that it's positioned, the exact longitude and latitude where it's positioned on the planet. Remember Washington, President Washington, what was he before he became president and a general and everything else? It's his work was that of a surveyor. And what was he doing? He had to find the exact location on the planet where this monument had to be, this city had to be built around for their religion. You have an entire religious city. Washington, D.C. is as religious a city as the Vatican is in Italy. So this is a religious city. It's an occult, hidden religious city. that monument is as important to this occult religion that's running Washington, D.C., that is built around, that is by leverage at this fulcrum, at this focal point, running America, that by extension is controlling, leveraging, running the world. That monument is as important to them in their religion, running the world, as the cross is to Christians. Why? Because at the cross in Christianity, humanity, the children of Adam, were saved from the consequences, the penalty of sin, when sin was placed on the Messiah, on the Christ. And he atoned for that sin. Being perfect, he could take on the sin of the world and die for the sin of the world, for all of humanity. Whereas if he hadn't been divinely perfect, he would have had to die for his own sin. But being perfect, he could take on others' sin and die in their place. So the cross and the death at the cross, that crossroads of time and history, Christ is this Redeemer. He, through his death, the world is saved, and then his resurrection. They believe in their religion that when Osiris had sex with the dead corpse, with the dildo attached to the dead corpse, and then became impregnated, that the world was saved on that day. And all of the action of Osiris and Isis and Set occurred in one day. He was killed, his parts scattered across the earth, then regathered by the mother and assembled, and the dildo made, and the sex where she became impregnant, all happened on the 17th day of the month. So the number of Osiris, the magical number of Osiris, is 17. And in the occult, in witchcraft, in sorcery, the maximum magnification of a spell is 3 times. So the witch turns 3 times in the circle to get the maximum magnification of a spell or something that they're doing. When the people go into the House of Commons there in Europe, and they want to approach, go into the bench, etc., and present, they knock 3 times on the door. The judge pounds the gavel 3 times. It's this magic spell magnification. When you think of 17, for example, here in America, and you want to see the leverage of this cult into America, of the magic, well, what do you call the most magical, top secret site in the continental U.S.? Area 51. 3 times 17, 51. Maximum magnification of the spell, the magic, the control. 17's their number. The devil doesn't do anything original. He takes things that God has created, God has done, and then he tries to flip them and twist them and own them in a different way. So, for example, 5 is the number of grace to Christians. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, 5 is the number of grace. But to the occult, the same number has a different meaning. 5 is the number of death to enemies and defense. So here in this holy city, the Pentagon is a 5-sided building. What's the function of the Pentagon? Death to enemies and defense. So 5, the building has to be 5-sided because it has occult meaning. It has hidden meaning, secret meaning. And by the way, what was the date that the ground was broke for the Pentagon? It was the groundbreaking ceremony was on 9/11, 1942. So there was symbolic meaning in this date that was chosen. Death to enemies and defense. In this occult city, why was the 9/11 so critical even then? Because this holy city of Washington, this unholy city, 9/11 in the ancient understanding is the birth date, the true birth date of Christ, 3 BC. So Jesus, the Messiah, was born on 9/11, 3 BC. And there was a signs in the heavens, Virgo giving birth at that time. You come forward modern times, what happened on 9/11 in the modern times? That was a ritual. It was an occult ritual at a very precise time where all the numbers had to match. Why 9/11? Well, could 9/11 have happened on 9/10? No. Could it have happened on 9/12? No. If it had happened, it wouldn't have had the ritual magic, the branding, to give it the power and strength that they wanted it to have. And so 9/11 had to happen on 9/11. And the coding with the way the phone stuff was done. Go back and look at David Rockefeller when he did his Newsweek article, the edition that was published, I believe it was 9/11, 1967, commemorating the building of the towers, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. That was, they knew well in advance when they wanted to have this happen. If you go into the Catholic churches in various parts of the world, you'll see IXXI in Roman numerals on a lot of the buildings in various locations. What's the meaning? Well, in Roman numerals, X equals 10. If you place a 1 to the left of it, that would make it a 9. If you were to place, say, 2 or 3, that would make it an 8 or a 7. So to the left, you go down from 10. So IX is 9. Now, if you add an X to the right, or an I to the right of the X, X plus 1 is 11. If you added 2 or 3, it'd be 12 or 13. So IXXI is 9/11. And that's the true birth date of Christ. So why would you do 9/11 on 9/11 in modern times? Because you have to sully and damage this date symbolically, because inside the cults, they know what the true meaning is, and the devil, the demons, can't stand to have that date ever honored or known in any favorable way. It's perpetually a horror date, something evil. And Washington, D.C., every street, every angle, every building here has symbolic meaning to the cult, because this is their equivalent of the Vatican. And at the very center of that city, at the center of this time clock of Washington, D.C., is the Washington Monument. Even actions done here around the city, the exact time they're done, where's the shadow from the sun being cast, or the moon in certain ceremonies? Where's it being cast around the city on this sundial effect of the city? You'll find lots of times decisions are made, they're posted, news conferences are done, and at the exact time that the shadow is passing over that ritual building or location from the tip of the Washington Monument, because it's a big hourglass dial. Horus, the sun in the sky, casting a shadow across the image of his father, and this dildo, because how are they born again? As I said, the cross is the place where eternal life is gained by those that follow the Judeo-Christian religion. Well, Christians anyway. Some Jews that believe that Christ was Messiah. The cross is that place where we find eternal life, forgiveness from sins. The Washington Monument is as important to the cult as the cross is to Christians. Why? Because that's where they find life. Their cult of Osiris was born again on the 17th of the month, when the mother, through sex with the corpse, conceived and had a child, a Messiah to their cult. And so this is the monument to the cult at the center of the city. Now, to people that don't believe in that religion, don't believe in that cult, this sounds crazy, insane, silly. How could people believe such a stupid thing that some baked out twisted mom has sex with the corpse with the dildo attached to the corpse and then became pregnant? Well, it's their religion. They can believe what they want, but they've built a whole city around it, and the imagery and symbology of that event, and your country, your nation, that you profess to be a Christian nation. Oh, we believe in God in heaven. We believe in Christ. We believe in forgiveness of sins. But your whole country is built around this unholy city. And at the center of that city, every function pivots off of that dildo. Fuck you. As crazy as that sounds, that's what they're doing. Now, let me just add this before we go on. Let me just add one thing. I'm almost done. What you have to think about here is that the fate of the world is really pivoting off of 3 locations on the planet, and all 3 locations are built around monuments of the same type. The city of London is the financial, religious city running the world. The city at the Vatican is this religious city built around a spire, a dildo in the middle of the city. It's about the Christian faith, etc. Well, somebody's captured that operation. Here in America, Washington Monument, it's a captured operation. Our city, our capital, is a captured operation. And everything is pivoting off of this secret handshake crowd that's running our country and by extension running the world. And this moment in time that we're living in is about the pushback. When the people showed up here on the 6th of January, they were praying. They were at a type of a worship service almost, and coming against this unholy rule of the Capitol. They were portrayed falsely as coming here to riot and pillage and kill and murder and everything else. But we have plenty of videos that show that that's the farthest possible thing from the truth. Even what supposedly happened in the Capitol, highly suspect on a lot of the details there. So at the end of the day, Christians showed up here to be counted, to take the country back and to put their foot down and say, no, we're not going to let this city run roughshod over the whole country and these people in Congress, etc., not administer the laws. They came to be counted and make their presence known. And then they went back home all across the country. This federal city and its policing operations are trying to arrest those people and portray them as having come here to destroy everything and part of some plot to, take over America. Well, who's the real plotters? Who's behind this? What's really going on? And the last thing I would tell you is this. Out across the churches in America, when you look at churches all across America, and other religions, by the way, too, you see these spires, these steeples on the churches. Oh, well, it was a clock tower, it's a bell tower, whatever. Even there's the symbology, ringing the bell. They have symbolic meaning that has sexual connotations. And it's about this merging, this hybridization of our society around their religion, your Christianity, your Judaism, even into the Muslims and other religions. They are capturing the way you think, making hybrids. And so these steeples with the cross on top, what are you really looking at? You're looking at the dildo with a cross attached, as though that somehow makes it okay. Where do these Masonic groups meet? A lot of times in the basement of churches. You have this blended situation, this hybridization. In their mind, Eve was beguiled, had sex with Lucifer, Satan, Samael, the devil, and became pregnant with Cain. And then she went and taught Adam the trick, and Adam impregnated her with Abel. And so Abel and Cain were twins, different fathers, same mother in the same birth cycle. And so you have this war going on planet Earth between the children. Since Abel was killed, the next child was Seth. So the children of Seth, who were direct descendants from Adam, and children of Cain, whose father was the devil. And we're both growing up in this world, and you're watching this fight between the Cainites and the Sethites, or the Adamites, for control of planet Earth. And this religion, this cult, this Osiris cult, is about promoting and protecting the Cainite race against the Adamic race. They believe they're more than human, that they're hybridized, with their father, the devil, being an alien from outside. And by the way, people talk about the reptile, aliens. They're laughing at you, because the reptile aliens, in their mind, Satan, the serpent, was a reptile. Satan, the serpent, had sex with Eve and was cursed to crawl on the earth when this was revealed by God, and he cursed Satan and made him crawl in the dust of the earth. He became a reptile, or he was a reptile, but changed his physical state. And so in their mind, if you have a hybrid, if you have aliens, it's the reptilians walking amongst us, the bloodline families, descendants of Cain. And this evil, because Osiris is their father, he was the most evil of all in their mind. Osiris, the reptilians, the hybrids, have to get control of the children of Adam and destroy them, because they're always going to be a threat to them in their religion. And the use of these cities, these holy cities, to manipulate and control the people, these leveraged locations to control the rest of the population of the earth and to rein them in, to starve them out, deindustrialize them, take away the right to build or make or own, take away their ability to use their money their own way, or what it even is, denominating what money is. They control all of that. They control you. They can starve you out. They can kill you off, because this is their payback. This is them killing Abel once and for all. The conflict between good and evil, Satan and God, that was there present at the Garden of Eden, trying to bring mankind under a curse, with Satan impregnating Eve, this Lucifer, this devil, whatever you want to call him, Satan by 1,000 names, to destroy God's creation, to hybridize it. That's still going on today. And that's the fight, in a nutshell, between the American people and the world. And this cult, which is being administered, which is being operated from the center of your unholy city in the middle of your country, take that to church on Sunday under your steeple with a cross on it and pray about it to God. That's what I would tell the American people today.
So thanks for tuning in. Remember, if you like the channel, please hit subscribe, like the episode, and share it on your favorite social media forum. The Bards FM podcast can be found on Podbean at www.bards.fm. It can also be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Pandora, and YouTube by entering Bards FM in the search bar on the respective apps or websites. And if you would like to support the channel with a donation link is below. All podcasts are written and produced by Scott Kesterson. Opinions expressed are the individual's only. Interpretations of events are the sole rights and opinions of the podcast presenter and guests. Bards FM, Bards of War, Fighting is Everything, and Expedition Cafe are trademarks of Scott Kesterson and Expedition Cafe. All work is owned and copyrighted by Scott Kesterson and Expedition Cafe. Thank you again. You have been listening to the Bards FM podcast. This is Scott Kesterson, out for now.